Hey guys, it's Mr. White back with you for part 2 of our lecture all about demand. Now, in the first video, we talked about how demand is the combination of the desire, willingness, and ability to purchase something right now. So it doesn't just mean you want something, it means that you actually can pay for it. We also talked about how demand makes sense because of something called the substitution effect and the income effect. So if you didn't watch the video, go back and check it out so you know what I'm talking about there. The last thing we talked about is how you can list demand on a demand schedule, and then you can plot it out on an X and Y axis where you put price on the Y axis and quantity demanded down on the X axis, and you can actually create something called a demand curve. Now, the last thing we said was that the demand curve makes the ceteris paribus assumption that the only thing consumers care about is price. But I'm sure that you and I know that in real life, price is not the only factor that influences demand. If you're not sure, just ask Michael Jordan. Now, if you watched that Last Dance documentary that came out over the summer, you would know, based on one of those episodes, that before Michael Jordan signed with Nike, they were not really a big shoe company. As a matter of fact, they were thought of mostly as a running shoe company, not a basketball shoe company. And they were not anything compared to other companies like Adidas or Converse. They were considered a small fish in a big sea, so to speak. But when Michael Jordan, who was the hottest athlete in the 1980s, signed with Nike, it pushed them over the top and made them into one of the biggest shoe companies in the world. As a matter of fact, today they are the biggest athletic shoe producer in the world. So what happened was the demand for Nike increased because of an outside factor, something that had nothing to do with the price of Nike shoes. What happened was a non-price determinant increased the demand for Nike. So anything other than price that affects the demand for a good or a service is what we call a non-price determinant. If something other than the price changes, what we do is we shift the entire demand curve either left or right to show the effect of that determinant. Now you might ask yourself, well, why do we have to shift the entire curve? Well, the reason why is because this determinant is causing quantity demanded to change at every possible price level. So what's actually happening is all those little coordinates dots are shifting over. We know that on the x-axis, things get bigger as you move to the right. So if we shift over to the right, that's considered an increase of demand. If we shift over to the left, that's called a decrease of demand. Now, one easy way to remember this is that if something other than the price changes, you can just say, oh, well, shift happens. Now, here's that market demand curve that we drew out in the first part of the presentation. This shows the market demand for candy in your first period class. Somebody's selling candy out of their backpack or something like that. And if you sort of surveyed them and asked them, well, how much would you buy at each price? This shows how much they would be able to sell at each price. And you can tell that obviously at a high price, the quantity is lower than at a low price. So when a non-price determinant increases demand, more customers will purchase that item at any price. So like, for example, if people decided that, I don't know, if there was some announcement that said that chocolate makes you grow taller, I bet you a lot more people would want the chocolate. That has nothing to do with the price of the candy bars, but I bet you more people would buy it at any price. So at 25 cents, more people would buy it. At 50 cents, more people would buy it. At 75 cents, more people would buy it. At $1, more people would buy it. At $1.25, more people would buy it. You can see that at every single price, the quantity has shifted over to the right. So I'll just show you that with a little pin here. Okay, you can see it's shifted over to the right, shifted over to the right, shifted over to the right, etc. Okay, everything's shifting over to the right. That's considered an increase of demand. Now, if something were to decrease our demand, like for example, if there was an announcement that eating chocolate causes acne, a lot of people are not going to want the chocolate now. It doesn't matter how much it costs. So we're going to have a leftward shift. So you can see that at 25 cents, we're selling fewer candy bars. At 50 cents, we're selling fewer. 75 cents, $1, we're not selling any candy bars. At $1.25, definitely nobody's buying the candy bars. And just like we did before, we can string all these together with a line, and you can see that we've got two new demand curves. So we could maybe even, if we wanted to go back and go ahead and label these, it's always good to label your curves. We could call this one like D2. And this one over here could be D1. Excuse my bad handwriting on this computer screen here. So an increase of demand is a shift to the right, and a decrease of demand is a shift to the left, as you can see here on the graph. Now, when it comes to those things that can change the demand for a product without the price changing, there are 5 basic categories. We call these the 5 non-price determinants of demand. They are buyer expectations, related goods, annual income, the number of buyers in the market, and the desires and tastes of buyers. Now, you might be thinking, well, how am I going to remember that? Well, it's pretty easy. Just say, I demand the brand. Yeah, see if you looked right down there, B-R-A-N-D, brand. Now, buyer expectations refers to the way that consumers anticipate changes to a product, and then they change their consumption habits accordingly. This usually has to do with people expecting the price of a product to change or the availability of a product to change. Like, you see this all the time outside of the Nike store when they do a big drop, you know, like some new limited edition thing that comes out. Like, these are the Cactus Jack Air Jordan 1s. They're endorsed by Travis Scott. They're limited edition. They're kind of a big deal. Nowadays, they resell for around $2,000. And so when something like this comes out, lots and lots of people go out to buy it because they expect something is going to happen. Now, this is a little bit different from something we'll talk about later, desires and tastes, because this is inherently speculative in nature. In other words, there might be people going out there to buy those Travis Scott shoes, not because they like them or think they even look good, but just because they're expecting the price to rise and they want to try to make a profit. Now, we see this all the time, like for example, Black Friday, or when there's a hot concert in town and everybody wants to get a ticket. People will actually start demanding the product before the product is even available because they're afraid that if they don't get it right away, they won't be able to get it at all. That's buyer expectations. Now, what would that look like on a graph? Well, think about this whole COVID-19 outbreak. Do you remember back in March and April when everybody was rushing out to buy toilet paper? This is what happened with the demand curve for toilet paper. It shifted to the right. All of a sudden, people were rushing out to buy toilet paper when they normally wouldn't have. And so there were more people demanding toilet paper at every possible price. You know, there were more people demanding the low price toilet paper and more people demanding the high price toilet paper and every other kind of toilet paper in between. And of course, we know that led to some massive shortages of toilet paper. Now, related goods is the next thing, and related goods just refers to complements and substitutes. Now, complements means two goods that are usually purchased together. A change in the price of one will shift the demand for the other, and the changes tend to occur in the same direction. So, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about something like peanut butter and jelly. Like, imagine if peanut butter was on sale, and maybe peanut butter is buy one, get one free. Well, if you were going into the store to buy one jar of peanut butter and you see that peanut butter is buy one, get one free, well, how many peanut butters are you going to buy? You're going to buy two, right? So in other words, price went down, your quantity demanded went up. It's the law of demand, we know that. But if you're going to buy 2 jars of peanut butter, what else are you going to buy 2 of? Well, you're going to buy 2 jars of jelly too, aren't you? Because here's the thing. If you got 2 jars of peanut butter, you need 2 jars of jelly to make your PB&J sandwiches. Now, did I say that the jelly was on sale? Did the price of the jelly change? Well, no, the price of the jelly is probably regular price, but you're still going to buy 2 of them. So what happened was you're demanding a greater quantity of jelly at the same price, not because of anything to do with the price of jelly, but because a complement, peanut butter, was on sale. Now, the next thing is substitutes. Substitutes means 2 goods that are identical or just really similar, and a change in the price of one will shift the demand of the other. Now, these changes are in the opposite direction. So just think like Sprite and Sierra Mist. Well, if you went into the store to buy Sprite, and all of a sudden the price of Sprite is higher than what you expected, but the price of Sierra Mist is the same, you might buy the Sierra Mist. The reason why this occurs is because of the fact that Sprite and Sierra Mist are close substitutes. Now, you might argue they're not the same. Yeah, they're not exactly the same, but they're close enough that if the price of one changes, you might be willing to just go ahead and get the other. So, what does this look like? Well, let's see what 2 complements would do. Like, for example, let's say if the price of Swiss Miss hot chocolate went down, the quantity demanded of Swiss Miss hot chocolate is going to go up. Right, okay. Well, here's the thing, guys. If you're going to buy a second box of Swiss Miss hot chocolate, are you still just going to get 1 pack of marshmallows? No, you're going to get 2, right? And so I didn't say the price of marshmallows changed, but we can assume that the demand for marshmallows is going to change. So you'll see what I've done here is I've shifted the demand to the right. I drew a little arrow so that we know that we're shifting to the right. And one thing I want you to pay close attention to is the fact that I'm labeling everything. You see how I've put price and quantity on my X and Y axis. I've labeled demand curve 1 and demand curve 2, quantity 1, quantity 2, price 1, price 2, all that stuff. It might seem really extra, but it's important to help keep you from getting confused because, guys, these can get confusing if you don't label well. Now, when we talk about substitutes, let's say, for example, if you were going to go buy some socks, maybe you were thinking about buying Hanes socks, but all of a sudden the price of Hanes socks is higher than before. Well, if the price of Hanes socks is higher than before, then you're not going to buy as many Hanes socks, and other people are going to behave in the same way. So what happens to the quantity demanded of Hanes socks? Well, price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. That's just the law of demand. At the same time, if Fruit of the Loom socks are still the same price, what's going to happen to the demand for Fruit of the Loom socks, a close substitute? Well, it's going to shift to the right. It's going to increase. So D1 goes to D2. There's greater demand for Fruit of the Loom socks at every possible price. Now, when I said that they go in opposite directions, you can see that with the Hanes socks, quantity went down, but with the Fruit of the Loom socks, the quantity went up. On the last slide, we saw that the quantity demanded for hot chocolate went up, and the quantity for the marshmallows also went up. So that's what I meant when I said they go in the same direction. All right, now the next is annual income. Annual income just means how much money you make. So when consumer income changes, it's going to change how much stuff you buy. Now, there are two different kinds of goods that we buy, and this just sort of has to do with the way that the income you make affects your consumption of those goods. A normal good means that when your income increases, the demand for that product increases. So sometimes we might refer to these as like name brand products, like for example, Coca-Cola. When your income goes up, you might actually buy more name brand Coca-Cola. But an inferior good is something that when your income decreases, your demand increases. Now, for example, if you lost your job and you're still buying your groceries, of course, you might not buy the name brand Coca-Cola. Instead, you might buy Big K Cola, right? Because Big K Cola is usually about $1 cheaper. So Big K Cola, I'm not saying that it's worse than Coca-Cola. You might really like Big K, and it tastes fine. I don't have a problem with it. But the thing is here, guys, it's considered an inferior good because generally when you make less money, that's when you buy more Big K Cola. As your income goes up, you buy more regular name brand Coca-Cola. And so that's why regular name brand Coca-Cola is what we call a normal good. So this is how it works. In this class, we're going to mostly assume that all goods are normal goods, but when your income increases, your demand for a normal good increases. So that means we're going to have a rightward shift. So if we went back to our Fruity Pebbles example, if you start making bigger paychecks, you might actually start demanding more Fruity Pebbles. However, if you're making a bigger paycheck, what's going to happen to your demand for Dino Bites? Well, it's going to go down. You're probably not going to buy the Dino Bites because you're instead buying the name brand Fruity Pebbles. So when your income increases, your demand for normal goods increases, but your demand for inferior goods decreases. Just to keep things from being super duper confusing, because you may be feeling a bit confused at this point, in this class, guys, we're going to assume that goods are normal. So if I ever say like people's income increases, don't spend too much time thinking about whether or not the product is a normal good or an inferior good. Just assume that it's normal and you're going to increase demand. If income decreases, the opposite's going to happen. We're going to decrease demand for the product. Now next up is the number of buyers. And the number of buyers just means the number of people in a market who can influence the demand for goods and services. If people enter the market, the demand increases. But if people leave the market, the demand decreases. So to kind of visualize what I'm talking about here, imagine if you had a little ice cream cart set up at a beach. Okay, you're selling ice creams at the beach, right? Now, when are you going to have more demand for ice cream? In the summer or in the winter? Pretty easy guess, right? We're going to obviously have a lot more demand in the summer, and we're probably not going to have very much demand in the winter time. Well, why is that? It's not because of the fact that people don't like ice cream in the winter. It's because of the fact that there's just not really very many people out at the beach during the winter time. You can see that in the summertime, the beach is full of people, and in the wintertime, the beach is almost empty. So that means that we don't have that many opportunities to sell ice cream. There's not as many people in the market, and so therefore the demand is lower. So you may remember a couple years ago we had the Super Bowl here in Houston, and the phenomenon of number of buyers had an influence on the demand for hotel rooms in Houston. What do you think happened to the demand for hotel rooms during that week before the Super Bowl here in Houston? Well, the demand increased. So we had the demand curve shifting to the right, and that actually led to a shortage of hotel rooms. There were no more hotel rooms because all of a sudden there were more people in the city of Houston who were demanding hotel rooms. Now, the last thing here is desires and tastes, and you can see something that maybe you used to desire a couple years ago, a fidget spinner. Desires and tastes means the popularity or perceptions of a good or a service can influence the demand for that good or service. So things like cigarettes. Cigarettes used to be really, really popular back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, but they're not so popular today because our perception of cigarettes has changed. In the old days, people thought cigarettes were actually good for your health, and so that actually helped increase demand for cigarettes. But in the 1980s, research came out showing that cigarettes were really bad for your health, and that changed people's desire for cigarettes. Clothing styles, as a teenager, those change really frequently. Pardon me. When I was in high school, this was considered a really cool way to dress. Yeah, I know you can hide your horror and revulsion, or you can let it all out, but that was how we thought it was cool to look. Obviously, desire for that style of clothing has changed, and so as the desire for something changes, the demand curve shifts regardless of the price of that product. So something that you may have a little bit more experience with, silly bands. I know those were pretty popular when you were little. What do you think has happened to the demand for silly bands over the last few years? It's decreased, right? Silly bands are not the cool thing that everybody has anymore. And so now the demand for silly bands is less. So at any price, you're not going to be demanding very many silly bands because silly bands are just not really cool anymore. So that's it for demand. You made it all the way through. Here's a quick summary of what we've gone over so far. Demand is not just wanting to buy something, it's the combination of the desire, willingness, and ability to purchase a good or a service right now. And the law of demand tells us that as the price of a good or a service goes up, the quantity that consumers demand goes down. If the price goes down, the quantity that consumers demand goes up, which means that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. If the price of a good or a service changes, we only change the quantity demanded. There's no need to shift. So if you're answering questions about supply and demand and it says the price of the product changed, either it went up or it went down, just move. No need to shift. But if something other than the price changes, a non-price determinant, that's when we have to shift the entire demand curve. We shift it to the right if it's an increase or to the left if it's a decrease. And those 5 different determinants are easy to remember if you say, I demand the brand, buyer expectations, related goods, annual income, number of buyers, and desires and tastes. Well, that's it for demand, guys. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.